The sun beat down on Sarah's back, each ray a tiny hammer blow. Sand, fine as powdered glass, swirled around her ankles, stinging her skin. She'd been walking for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few hours. Time blurred in the desert heat. Her throat was parched, her lips cracked, and her hope dwindled with every step. All she had left was the ring. A gold band, once shiny and promising, now dull with dust and smeared with the grime of her desperation. It was supposed to be her wedding ring, supposed to symbolize a future, a home, a family. Now, it was a heavy weight on her finger, a constant reminder of Thomas's betrayal. He'd left her, stranded her in this desolate wasteland with nothing but the clothes on her back and that ring. Said he'd change his mind, said he couldn't go through with it. He'd taken the wagon, the supplies, everything they owned. Just left her to die. Sarah sank to her knees, the fight draining out of her. She clutched the ring, its cold metal a small comfort. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the already hazy horizon. She was alone, utterly, hopelessly alone. The desert stretched out before her, an endless expanse of sand and rock, offering no solace, no escape. Was this how it ended? A forgotten grave in the middle of nowhere, marked only by the relentless sun and the whispering wind? She closed her eyes, waiting for the end, the ring her only witness. The desert shimmered before her closed eyes, but behind them, another landscape unfolded. A green one, full of promise. She saw the bustling streets of St. Louis, the riverboats chugging up the Mississippi. She remembered the day Thomas had proposed, down by the riverbank, the sunlight glinting off the water as he slipped the ring onto her finger. He had painted a picture of the West, a land of opportunity, where they could build a life together, far from the crowded cities and the limitations of their past. He spoke of fertile land, waiting to be cultivated, of towns springing up overnight, of fortunes to be made. Sarah, tired of working long hours in the dress shop, dreaming of something more, had eagerly embraced the idea. She sold her few possessions, said goodbye to her friends, and set off with Thomas, her heart full of hope. The journey had been arduous. Weeks spent crammed in a wagon, the constant jostling, the dust, the lack of privacy. But Sarah hadn't complained. She was focused on the future, on the life that awaited her. She pictured a small house with a garden, children playing in the yard, the smell of freshly baked bread wafting from the kitchen. Then the change. It started subtly. Thomas became withdrawn, irritable. He stopped talking about their plans, avoided her gaze. She tried to reassure him, to understand what was wrong, but he brushed her off, his words curt and dismissive. Then, the ultimate betrayal. He stopped the wagon, told her it was a mistake, that he couldn't do it, and left her there, with nothing but the ring and a broken heart. The green landscape faded, replaced by the harsh reality of the desert sun. The sun, a relentless eye in the sky, refused to offer her any mercy. Sarah forced herself to open her own eyes, the memory of Thomas's betrayal a fresh wound. She couldn't give up. Not yet. The dream might be dead, but she wasn't. Not if she could help it. She scanned the horizon, desperate for any sign of life. Nothing. Just the endless expanse of sand and rock. She needed water. Desperately. Her tongue felt like sandpaper. Her throat ached with thirst. She remembered something her father had told her years ago about finding water in the desert. Look for birds, he'd said. They always know where the water is. But there were no birds. Only the vultures circling high above, their shadows mocking her plight. She tried to stand, but her legs were weak and shaky. She stumbled, falling to her knees, the sand scraping against her skin. She crawled forward, inching her way across the scorching ground. She found a small crevice in a rock, offering a sliver of shade. She huddled there, trying to conserve her energy. She remembered seeing a cactus earlier, a large prickly pear. She knew they held water, but how to get to it? And even if she did, how to extract the liquid without a knife? She looked at the ring on her finger. It was the only tool she had. An idea sparked in her mind, a desperate gamble. She might ruin the ring, but it was already worthless to her as a symbol of love. Maybe Just maybe it could save her life. She started to rub the ring against a sharp rock, determined to create a makeshift blade. It was slow, agonizing work, but she persisted, driven by the primal instinct to survive. Miles away, silhouetted against the setting sun, Caleb rode his horse, Dusty. He was a man carved from the land itself, weathered and worn, his face etched with the stories of sun, wind, and loss. His wife, Mary, had been taken by fever 2 years prior, leaving a hole in his heart that the vastness of the prairie couldn't fill. He owned a small ranch, nestled in a hidden valley, a place he and Mary had built together, brick by brick. Now, it was just him and Dusty, the silence of the ranch amplifying his loneliness. He spent his days tending to his cattle, mending fences, and trying to outrun the memories that haunted him. He wasn't looking for anything. Not love, not companionship, not even a friendly face. He was content, or at least resigned, to a life of solitude. The land was all he needed, the rhythm of the seasons his only companion. But the desert had a way of disrupting even the most hardened soul. As Caleb rode, he noticed something out of place, a flicker of white against the brown and ochre landscape. He squinted, urging Dusty forward. It looked like a person. He approached cautiously, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle slung across his saddle. The desert could breed desperate men, men who would kill for a horse, for supplies, for anything. He had to be careful, but as he drew closer, he saw that it wasn't a threat. It was a woman, and she was in trouble, a big trouble. She was lying motionless near a rock, her clothes tattered, her face pale and drawn. He knew, with a sinking feeling, that she wouldn't last much longer. The desert was claiming another victim. Caleb dismounted, his boots crunching on the gravelly ground. He knelt beside the woman, his calloused hand gently touching her forehead. She was burning up. He had to get her out of the sun, and fast. But a wave of hesitation washed over him. He had deliberately shut himself off from the world, built walls around his heart to protect himself from further pain. Getting involved meant opening himself up again, risking more loss. He looked at her face, pale and fragile, framed by tangled strands of hair. She looked so young, so vulnerable. He saw a flicker of Mary in her, a reminder of the woman he had loved and lost. He couldn't just leave her there to die, even if it meant stirring up the grief he had tried so hard to bury. He knew the risks. Bringing a stranger back to his ranch could disrupt his carefully constructed solitude, could lead to complications he wasn't prepared for. He had enough to deal with, battling his own demons, trying to keep his ranch afloat. But the desert had its own code, a code of survival, of helping those in need. And Caleb, despite his reservations, was a man of honor. He couldn't turn his back on someone in distress, not even if it meant facing his own fears. He made his decision. He carefully lifted the woman into his arms, surprised by how light she was. He carried her to Dusty, gently placing her across the saddle. He knew the ride back to the ranch would be long and arduous, but he was determined to get her there. He spurred Dusty into motion, his gaze fixed on the horizon, a new sense of purpose stirring within him. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he couldn't just stand by and watch her die. The ranch house, small but sturdy, stood as a testament to Caleb and Mary's hard work. He carried Sarah inside, laying her gently on the bed in the spare room, a room that had been empty for far too long. The room still held Mary's touch. A quilt she had sewn lay folded at the foot of the bed, and a small vase of dried flowers sat on the windowsill. Caleb worked quickly, his movements efficient and practiced. He fetched water from the well, dampened a cloth, and gently bathed Sarah's face and neck. Her skin was dry and cracked, her lips parched. He coaxed a few drops of water between her lips, relieved when she swallowed weakly. He knew she needed more than just water. She needed nourishment, rest, and time to heal. He rummaged through his pantry, finding a can of peaches and some dried beef. He prepared a simple broth, hoping she would be able to keep it down. As he sat beside her bed, watching her sleep, he couldn't help but wonder about her story. Who was she? Where had she come from? And what had happened to leave her stranded in the desert, on the brink of death? He noticed the ring on her finger, a simple gold band. A wedding ring? He wondered if she had a husband, a family, somewhere out there, waiting for her. He knew he would have to ask her eventually. But for now, his priority was to nurse her back to health, to give her a chance to recover. He had made a commitment to save her life, and he intended to see it through. He sat through the night, tending to her fever, watching over her, the silence of the ranch broken only by her shallow breathing and the occasional creak of the floorboards. The weight of his past was still there, but so was a glimmer of hope, a faint light in the darkness that had consumed him for so long. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, Sarah began to recover. The fever broke, her strength returned, and the color came back to her cheeks. She was still weak, but she was alive, and she was grateful to Caleb, the quiet, taciturn cowboy who had saved her life. She started helping with small chores around the ranch, gathering eggs, feeding the chickens, washing dishes. The work was simple, but it gave her a sense of purpose, a feeling of being useful. She learned to milk the cows, her initial awkwardness giving way to a surprising proficiency. Caleb didn't say much, but she could see the appreciation in his eyes. He taught her how to ride a horse, patiently guiding her through the basics. She loved the feeling of the wind in her hair, the vastness of the landscape stretching out before her. It was a freedom she had never experienced before. She learned about Caleb's past, about Mary, the woman he had loved and lost. She saw the pain in his eyes when he spoke of her, the grief that still lingered. She understood his reluctance to open himself up again, his fear of getting hurt. She told him about her own past, about Thomas, the man who had betrayed her. She didn't hold back, pouring out her heart, sharing her shame and her anger. Caleb listened patiently, offering no judgment, only understanding. They found a strange sort of comfort in each other's company. Two broken souls, finding solace in the shared silence of the prairie. Sarah began to feel a sense of belonging, a feeling she hadn't expected to find in this desolate place. The ranch, once a symbol of Caleb's loneliness, was slowly becoming a home. The days grew shorter, the nights cooler. Autumn painted the prairie in hues of gold and red. Sarah and Caleb fell into a comfortable routine. They worked side by side during the day, mending fences, tending to the cattle, preparing for the coming winter. In the evenings, they shared meals at the worn wooden table, the silence punctuated by the crackling of the fire and the occasional shared glance. There was an undeniable attraction between them, a spark that flickered beneath the surface. But both were hesitant to acknowledge it, afraid of disrupting the fragile peace they had found. Caleb still carried the weight of his grief, the memory of Mary a constant presence in his life. Sarah was still scarred by Thomas's betrayal, unsure if she could ever trust again. Sometimes, Caleb would catch Sarah looking at him, a warmth in her eyes that made his heart skip a beat. He would quickly look away, afraid of what he might see, afraid of what he might feel. Sarah, in turn, would notice Caleb watching her, a longing in his gaze that mirrored her own. She would blush, turning her attention back to her work, her heart pounding in her chest. They shared stories, dreams, and fears. Caleb told her about his childhood on the ranch, about his love for the land, about the joy he had found with Mary. Sarah shared her aspirations, her desire for a family, her longing for a place to call home. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Caleb reached for Sarah's hand. His touch was gentle, hesitant. Sarah looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. He squeezed her hand, a silent reassurance. The unspoken feelings hung in the air, thick and heavy, waiting to be acknowledged. The sky turned a sickly yellow, the wind howled like a banshee, and the air crackled with static electricity. Caleb knew what was coming, a dust storm, and a big one. He had seen them before, these violent tantrums of the desert, capable of stripping the land bare and burying everything in their path. He rushed to the barn, Sarah close behind him. "We need to get the livestock secured," he shouted over the rising wind, "and batten down the hatches on the house." They worked together, their movements frantic but coordinated. They herded the cattle into the barn, securing the doors and windows. They reinforced the roof of the chicken coop, making sure the hens were safe and sound. They raced back to the house, securing the shutters, piling sandbags against the doors, and bringing in anything that could be blown away by the wind. The storm hit with a vengeance. The wind roared, shaking the house to its foundations. The air turned thick with dust, making it impossible to see more than a few feet. Sarah and Caleb huddled inside, listening to the fury of the storm raging outside. "It'll pass," Caleb said, his voice calm but strained. "Just have to wait it out." Hours passed, and the storm showed no sign of abating. The dust seeped in through the cracks in the walls, coating everything in a fine layer of grit. Sarah coughed, her eyes watering. Caleb wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "We'll get through this," he said, his voice firm. Together. The storm raged on, testing their strength, their resilience, and their growing bond. They were alone, facing the fury of nature, but they were together. And in that moment, they knew that they could face anything as long as they had each other. The storm was a terrifying force, but it was also a catalyst, forging a connection between them that was stronger than either of them had ever imagined. The storm finally broke at dawn, leaving behind a landscape transformed. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, the trees bent and broken, the air heavy with the smell of damp earth. Sarah and Caleb emerged from the house, blinking in the pale sunlight. They surveyed the damage, a shared sense of relief washing over them. The ranch had survived, battered but intact. The barn was standing, the livestock were safe, and the house was still habitable. They had weathered the storm together. As they walked around, assessing the extent of the damage, Sarah stumbled, losing her balance. Caleb reached out to steady her, his hand gripping her arm. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world seemed to stand still. The fear, the shared hardship, the raw emotion of the night had stripped away their inhibitions. The unspoken feelings that had been simmering beneath the surface finally bubbled over. Caleb pulled Sarah closer, his gaze searching hers. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. He didn't need to say anything more. Sarah knew what he was feeling. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the lines etched by the sun and the wind. She leaned in, and their lips met, a tentative, hesitant kiss that quickly deepened into something more. It was a kiss born of gratitude, of survival, of longing. It was a kiss that promised a future they could build together on this land, in this place. When they finally broke apart, breathless and shaken, they looked at each other, their eyes filled with a newfound understanding. The storm had passed, leaving behind a clean slate, a chance to start over. And they were ready to take it together. The desert still stretched around them, harsh and unforgiving, but now it felt like home. A few days later, a lone rider approached the ranch. He was a burly man, with a face weathered by the sun and hardened by experience. His name was Jed, and he owned the neighboring ranch, a sprawling operation that stretched for miles in every direction. He was known for being ruthless and ambitious, a man who always got what he wanted. Caleb watched him approach, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle he kept near the door. He didn't trust Jed. The man had always been envious of his land, of his water rights, of everything he had worked so hard to build. Jed dismounted, his eyes scanning the ranch, taking in the damage from the storm. He saw Sarah, standing near the barn, tending to the chickens. A smirk crossed his face. Well, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Look what the cat dragged in. Didn't think you had it in you, Caleb, taking in stray dogs." Caleb stepped forward, his jaw clenched. "She's a guest here, Jed. Show some respect." Jed chuckled, his eyes fixed on Sarah. "Respect? For a woman like that? I don't think so." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I know who she is, Caleb. I know her little secret." Sarah froze, her face paling. She knew what was coming. She had hoped her past would stay buried, but it seemed it had finally caught up with her. Jed turned to Caleb, his eyes gleaming with malice. "That ring she's wearing? It's not just any ring. It's a promise, a commitment. But she broke that promise, didn't she? She ran away, leaving her fiancé at the altar. A fiancé who just happens to be a very powerful man. He paused, waiting for Caleb's reaction. You've got a runaway bride on your hands, Caleb, and she's brought nothing but trouble with her. Caleb's eyes narrowed, his gaze hardening as he stared at Jed. He didn't care about Sarah's past. It was her present, her strength, her kindness that mattered to him. But he knew Jed wouldn't see it that way. The man was driven by greed and spite, and he would use anything to get what he wanted. What do you want, Jed? Caleb asked, his voice low and dangerous. Jed smirked. I want what's rightfully mine. This land, these water rights. And now, it seems I want something else too. He looked at Sarah, his eyes filled with a predatory glint. I want you to leave, Sarah. Just pack your bags and disappear. And if you don't, he paused, leaning closer to Caleb, I'll tell your fiancé where you are. And believe me, he'll come looking for you, and he won't be happy. Sarah stood her ground, her chin lifted, her eyes flashing with defiance. I'm not afraid of him, she said, her voice trembling slightly but firm. And I'm not going anywhere. Jed laughed, a harsh, grating sound. You're making a mistake, Sarah. A big mistake. You don't know what you're up against. He turned back to Caleb. Think about it, Caleb. Is she worth it? Is she worth risking everything you've worked for? He spat on the ground, then mounted his horse. I'll be back, he said, his voice a low growl. And when I do, I expect you to be gone. He rode away, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Sarah looked at Caleb, her eyes filled with fear and uncertainty. She knew she had brought trouble to his doorstep, and she didn't want to ruin his life. Caleb turned to Sarah, his face etched with concern. Is what he said true? He asked, his voice gentle. About your fiancé? Sarah nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. It's true, she whispered. I was supposed to marry him, but I couldn't go through with it. He wasn't the man I thought he was. What happened? Caleb asked, his hand reaching out to take hers. Sarah hesitated, then took a deep breath. His name is Harrison Blackwood, she said, her voice barely audible. He's a wealthy businessman, powerful, influential, but he's also cruel, controlling. He wanted to own me, to dictate every aspect of my life. She paused, her voice trembling. I tried to break it off, but he wouldn't let me. He threatened my family, threatened to ruin them. I didn't know what to do, so I ran. I left everything behind, hoping to find a new life, a life where I could be free. Caleb squeezed her hand, his eyes filled with compassion. You did what you had to do, he said. You protected yourself, your family. But now I've brought trouble here, Sarah said, her voice choked with tears. I've put you in danger. Don't worry about me, Caleb said, his voice firm. I can handle Jed, and I won't let him hurt you. I promise you that. He stood up, his eyes blazing with anger. I'm going to have a little talk with Jed, he said, his voice low and dangerous. I'm going to make it very clear that he's not welcome here, and that if he tries to harm you, he'll have to answer to me. He grabbed his rifle and headed out the door, his determination etched on his face. Sarah watched him go, her heart filled with a mixture of fear and gratitude. She knew Caleb was risking everything for her, and she didn't know if she deserved it. Caleb found Jed at the edge of his property, overseeing a group of his men who were mending a broken fence. Jed saw him coming, a smirk spreading across his face. He dismissed his men with a wave of his hand, his eyes fixed on Caleb. Well, Jed said, his voice dripping with false amiability. Didn't expect to see you so soon. Changed your mind about the little lady? Caleb stopped a few feet away from him, his rifle held loosely in his hand, but his grip firm. Stay away from Sarah, Jed, he said, his voice low and menacing. She's under my protection, and I won't let you harm her. Jed laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Protection? What can you do to protect her, Caleb? You're just one man, and I have plenty of resources. I don't care about your resources, Caleb said, his eyes blazing with anger. I'm telling you, stay away from her, and stay off my land. Jed stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. Or what, Caleb? You gonna shoot me? You don't have the guts. Don't test me, Jed, Caleb said, his voice barely a whisper. I'm not afraid to do what needs to be done." The tension between them was thick and palpable, the air crackling with unspoken threats. They stood there for a moment, locked in a silent battle of wills, each daring the other to make the first move. Finally, Jed broke the silence. "You're making a mistake, Caleb," he said, his voice a low growl. "You're choosing a woman you barely know over everything you've worked for. You'll regret this." "I don't think so," Caleb said, his voice firm. "I'm choosing what's right, and I won't regret that." He turned and walked away, leaving Jed seething with rage. He knew this wasn't over, but he was ready. He would protect Sarah, no matter the cost. Caleb hadn't gone far when he heard the sound of hooves behind him. He turned to see Jed charging towards him on his horse, his face contorted with rage. Before Caleb could react, Jed had dismounted and was swinging a fist at him. The punch caught Caleb off guard, sending him staggering backwards. He quickly regained his balance and squared off against Jed, his fists clenched. "You asked for this, Caleb," Jed snarled, lunging at him again. Caleb dodged the blow and retaliated with a punch of his own, connecting with Jed's jaw. Jed stumbled, but quickly recovered and came at Caleb again, swinging wildly. The two men grappled, exchanging blows, their bodies colliding with the force of their anger. They rolled on the ground, kicking up dust, each determined to gain the upper hand. Sarah, who had been watching from the porch, saw the fight erupt and ran towards them, her heart pounding in her chest. "Stop it!" she screamed, her voice filled with terror. "Stop it, both of you!" She reached them just as Jed had managed to pin Caleb to the ground, his fist raised to strike. Without thinking, Sarah grabbed a nearby rock and swung it at Jed's head. The rock connected with a sickening thud, and Jed collapsed, falling unconscious on top of Caleb. Sarah stood there, trembling, the rock still clutched in her hand. She had never hit anyone before, but she had done what she had to do to protect Caleb. Caleb pushed Jed's body off him and sat up, his face bruised and bleeding. He looked at Sarah, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and concern. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm okay," she said, her voice trembling. "But are you?" Interrupt, didn't judge, didn't offer platitudes. He simply listened, his presence a silent reassurance, a solid anchor in the storm of her emotions. When she had finished, she was exhausted, drained. She looked at Caleb, her eyes filled with shame and fear. "Now you know everything," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You know what I am. Orinovi, Olenur, Alcoward." Caleb reached out and took her hand, his grip firm and warm. "You're not any of those things," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You're a survivor, Sarah. You're strong, brave, and kind, and you don't have to be afraid anymore." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "I know I haven't known you for very long," he said, "but I know what I feel, and what I feel is, I care about you, Sarah, more than I ever thought possible." He stood up and walked over to the window, his back to her. "I know you've been hurt," he said, his voice low, "and I know you're scared, but I want you to know that I'm here for you. I'll protect you, whatever it takes, and I'll never let anyone hurt you again. I promise you that." He turned back to her, his eyes filled with sincerity. "So tell me, Sarah," he said, his voice soft but firm. "What do you want to do? Do you want to stay here? Do you want to face him? Or do you want to run again?" He left the choice entirely up to her. Sarah looked at Caleb, her heart swelling with a mixture of love and gratitude. She had never met anyone like him, anyone who could see past her flaws, her mistakes, her past. He had accepted her completely, unconditionally, and in that moment, she knew what she wanted to do. "I want to stay," she said, her voice firm and clear. "I want to face him. I'm tired of running. I'm tired of being afraid. This is my home now, and I'm not going to let anyone take it away from me." Caleb smiled, his eyes filled with pride. He walked over to her and took her hand, his grip strong and reassuring. "Then that's what we'll do," he said. "We'll face him together, and we'll win." He helped her to her feet, and they walked outside, hand in hand, into the setting sun. They knew the road ahead would be difficult, that they would face challenges and obstacles they couldn't even imagine. But they were ready. They had each other, and that was all that mattered. As they stood there, gazing at the horizon, they heard the sound of hooves approaching. They turned to see Jed riding towards them, his face contorted with anger. He stopped a few feet away from them, his eyes blazing with fury. "You haven't left yet?" he snarled, his voice dripping with venom. "I gave you a chance to walk away. Now you're going to pay the price." He dismounted and strode towards them, his fists clenched. But before he could reach them, Caleb stepped forward, blocking his path. "Stay away from her, Jed," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I warned you once. I won't warn you again." Jed stopped, his eyes narrowing. "You think you can stop me, Caleb?" he sneered. "You're just one man." "Maybe," Caleb said, his voice calm but firm. "But I'm not afraid to die for what's right." Before Jed could make another move, the sound of approaching horses filled the air. A cloud of dust billowed on the horizon, growing closer with each passing moment. Jed, realizing he was outnumbered and outmatched, hesitated. He glanced at Sarah, his eyes filled with a mixture of rage and frustration. Then he looked at Caleb, his expression a mask of hatred. "This isn't over," he snarled, his voice low and venomous. "I'll be back, and when will regret this." He spurred his horse and galloped away, disappearing into the vastness of the prairie. The approaching riders turned out to be a group of Caleb's friends, neighboring ranchers who had heard about Jed's behavior and had come to offer their support. They were rough, rugged men, but they were loyal and dependable, and they made it clear that they had Caleb's back. With Jed gone for now, and the support of his friends, Caleb and Sarah turned their attention to the future. They spent the next few days solidifying their bond, talking, laughing, and dreaming of the life they would build together. They decided to plant a garden, a symbol of their hope and their commitment to each other. They tilled the soil side by side, their hands working in unison. They planted seeds of vegetables, herbs, and flowers, carefully nurturing them, watching them sprout and grow. As they worked, they talked about their plans for the future. They would expand the ranch, raise a family, and create a home filled with love and laughter. They knew it wouldn't be easy, that they would face challenges along the way, but they were confident that they could overcome anything as long as they had each other. Sarah took off her ring, the gold band that had been a symbol of so much pain and betrayal. She looked at Caleb, her eyes filled with love. "I don't need this anymore," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I have everything I need right here with you." Caleb took the ring from her hand and held it for a moment, then slipped it onto his own finger. "I'll keep it safe," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "as a reminder of how far you've come and how strong you are." He kissed her then, a long, lingering kiss that sealed their commitment to each other, a promise of a future filled with love, hope, and happiness. But the peace was short-lived. A few weeks later, as Sarah and Caleb were tending to their garden, they saw a group of riders approaching, a dark cloud on the horizon. This time, it wasn't Caleb's friends. It was Jed, and he had brought reinforcements. He rode at the head of a dozen men, all armed to the teeth, their faces grim and determined. They were hired guns, men who lived by the sword, men who would do anything for money. Caleb grabbed his rifle and pulled Sarah behind him, his eyes fixed on the approaching riders. He knew what Jed wanted. He wanted the ranch, he wanted Sarah, and he was willing to do anything to get them. "Get inside," Caleb said, his voice low and urgent. "Bar the doors and windows, and stay down." Sarah did as she was told, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew this was it, the final showdown. She barred the door, secured the windows, and grabbed Caleb's shotgun, her hands trembling. Jed and his men surrounded the house, their rifles raised, their faces grim. "Caleb," Jed shouted, his voice echoing across the prairie. "Come out here and face me, or I'll burn this place to the ground." Caleb didn't respond. He was positioned behind a window, his rifle aimed, his finger on the trigger. He knew he was outnumbered, but he wasn't afraid. He would defend his home and the woman he loved to the death. Jed and his men opened fire, bullets shattering the windows, tearing through the walls. Caleb returned fire, his shots precise and deadly. Sarah, her fear giving way to a steely determination, fired the shotgun, scattering the attackers. They fought throughout the day, a desperate battle for survival. Caleb and Sarah used their wits and their courage, setting traps, ambushing the attackers, and using the terrain to their advantage. They were outnumbered, but they were resourceful, and they were determined to win. As the sun began to set, the tide of the battle began to turn. Caleb and Sarah had managed to pick off several of Jed's men, and the remaining attackers were growing weary and discouraged. They realized that they had underestimated their opponents, that Caleb and Sarah were not going to give up without a fight. Finally, as darkness descended, the last of Jed's hired guns turned tail and fled, leaving Jed standing alone, defeated and humiliated. Caleb emerged from the house, his rifle aimed at Jed's chest. "It's over, Jed," Caleb said, his voice cold and hard. "You've lost." Jed looked around at the carnage, his face contorted with rage. He knew he was beaten. He had underestimated Caleb and Sarah, and he had paid the price. Suddenly, he lunged at Caleb, pulling a knife from his boot. But Sarah was there, quick as lightning, struck him from behind with the butt of the shotgun, knocking him unconscious. The next morning, the sheriff arrived, summoned by Caleb's friends, and took Jed into custody. He would face justice for his crimes, for his violence, for his greed. With Jed gone and the hired guns scattered, the ranch was finally safe. Caleb and Sarah were exhausted, battered but alive, and they were stronger than ever, their bond forged in the crucible of adversity. They spent the next few weeks repairing the damage to the ranch, rebuilding what had been broken. They replanted their garden, tending to the seeds with renewed hope. They knew that life wouldn't always be easy, but they were ready to face whatever challenges came their way, together. The memory of Mary would always be a part of Caleb's life, but he had found a new love, a new purpose, with Sarah. And Sarah had found a home, a family, a place where she belonged. They had both been lost, broken, alone, but they had found each other in the most unlikely of places, in the heart of the harsh desert. And they had created a love that was stronger than any storm, any threat, any past. They were ready to embrace their new life together, on the ranch, under the vast, endless sky. They had each other, and that was all that mattered. The desert that had once threatened to destroy them had ultimately brought them together. It was their sanctuary, their home, and the foundation of their love. Years passed. The ranch flourished, the garden bloomed, and the sounds of laughter filled the air. Caleb and Sarah built the life they had dreamed of, a life filled with love, hope, and happiness. They had children, two bright, energetic youngsters who loved to explore the prairie, to help with the chores, and to listen to their parents' stories. They learned about the desert, about survival, about courage, and about the importance of family. As the sun began to set one evening, painting the sky in hues of orange, pink, and purple, Sarah and Caleb stood on their porch, hand in hand, gazing at the horizon. The children played nearby, their laughter echoing in the warm desert air. The desert stretched out before them, vast and endless, but it no longer held any fear. It was their home, their sanctuary, the place where they had found each other, the place where they had built their life. They looked at each other, their eyes filled with love and gratitude. They had been through so much, they had faced so many challenges, but they had overcome them all together. They knew that the future was uncertain, that there would be more challenges ahead, but they were ready. They had each other, and they had their family, and they had their love, and that was all that mattered. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the prairie, they embraced, their hearts filled with hope. They had found their happy ending in the most unlikely of places under the vast, endless sky. The desert had claimed her, then given her back, not as a lost soul, but as a woman reborn, claimed by love, forever home.